For Vecna, Eve of Ruin, we go to a lot of different locations.
Yeah.
One of those is the Shadowfell. What is that town?
So this is a city in the Shadowfell that is behind Neverwinter on the Sword Coast in the Forgotten Realms. And that town is called Evernight. And it is a strange, warped, dark mirror version of Neverwinter. It is ashy, it is populated by undead, and it's just kind of a scary place. When mortals go there, it's very obvious that they don't belong and that they aren't denizens of there. And the characters get shunted into Evernight because of something that happens in Neverwinter. They stop a ritual and the energies pull them into a rift that leads into Evernight, and they have to find their way back and traverse this entire area and learn about some of the things that have been going on the material plane in Neverwinter, but also in lots and lots of other settings that set the stage for the later parts of the adventure. That's something that sometimes people can get, like, it's easy to get very focused on Ravenloft and the Dread Domains, but the rest of the Shadowfell often is a mirror of the prime material plane. Yes.
So if there is a town in your campaign or the prime material plane, there is going to be a shadow version of that, or a Feywild version of that as well. It's true, and in a very helpful way, there are these things called dusk crevices that lead to the Shadowfell, or from the Shadowfell back to where the characters originated from, and those can open up and be anywhere. There are some places where they're permanent in the Shadowfell, which the characters in Eve of Ruin have to find to be able to get back to Neverwinter, but they open and close sort of at random, or magic can affect them, or ritual magic can affect them in this case. And so it's a very interesting way to be able to introduce the characters into what they don't expect, into the Shadowfell, and have strange things happen and have it be a surprise to them. Other than just the Shadowfell, we have Ravenloft in the Shadowfell. Yeah, absolutely. So you go to Ravenloft and you go to Death House, which is the location that some people may or may not be familiar with, that has a whole map and has a whole background in the campaign setting. But a piece of the Rod of Seven Parts is in Death House, and Elizabeth and Gustav Durst have got it inexplicably. You don't necessarily know exactly what it is, but they are using it to try to get the attention of Strahd. And so the characters have to race through Death House as they are dealing with multiple competing cults who know that this very powerful magic item is here and are trying to get it for their own purposes. There's an Inquisitor of Almist who knows that something is going on, that there's a lot of occult energy going on, and she's trying to go through it to stop any bad things that are happening. And then Strahd's attention is eventually gains, which is exactly what the Dursts want. And the characters then get to decide how are they going to deal with all of this attention that has been brought onto this house, onto this rad piece, and are they going to negotiate with Strahd for the peace? If he even shows up, he does. Are they going to try to take it from the cultist? How are they going to make that happen? And you can fight Strahd in this if you want to, but you don't have to. It's a player choice. Lucy, tell me about what are the stakes in, say, when we go to the Eberron campaign setting? Like, what's interesting about that? What's interesting about that is that we go to a place in Eberron that you don't necessarily see a lot, but you've definitely read about or probably heard about as you've been discussing this if you're a fan of Eberron. You go to the Mournland, and that's the place that was originally called Sire, that became a magical wasteland during the Last War. That's how the Last War ended. And so to actually get to go into that land, you really get to experience how the magical wasteland has affected travel there, how it's affected the people and the survivors who live there, and trying to track down a specific magical item in a land where magic isn't functioning anymore and where travel is very difficult and obfuscated. That is a real challenge for the characters. It's one of the earlier places that you get to go in the adventure, but I think it's one of the most interesting because the rod is not yet pointing to that next piece. It's giving a very confused aura. It's giving a very confused location where the next rod piece is, and it's because of that interference from that magical wasteland. And we still don't know what happened in the Mournland. And we still don't know. That's what I love about that. Yes, yeah. Particular bit in Eberron is like you don't know what the disaster was. Exactly. You only see the effects of it, and you see how terrible it was, and how it shattered an entire nation, and it killed
hundreds of thousands of people, and it destroyed the colossi, the Warforged Colossus, and there's a whole bunch of them littered all throughout this area of the Mournland where you're having to travel in the adventure. And in fact, you have to go inside one of them and see some of the strange things that happened and see the remnants of the last war. It's been a couple hundred years, I think, at this point in that setting, but those things are still there because this all happened all at once and everything just kind of shut down. It's like a nuclear wasteland.
Yeah. And it's funny how completely distinctive each of these settings is. So we go to Krynn, we go to Dragonlance, and we interact with some associates.
Associates
some famous,
dun, dun, dun.
Yeah, some famous characters.
We can say, I think it's fine. Associates of Lord Soth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Lord Soth is involved.
Yes. What is the point of playing on Krynn if you don't at least hear the specter of Lord Soth lurking in the background?
Right. Where do we specifically go on Krynn?
So in Krynn, we are going to a place called the Three Moons Vault. So that's the eventual destination of that chapter. And the rod piece is being held by an associate of Lord Soth, who is an evil sorcerer, who is trying to use the piece to enact an effect around this whole area that is essentially to keep out any opponents of Lord Soth. There are these druids and these lycanthropes that are a resistance force against her and Lord Soth, and she is trying to not only put them down but also keep them out. And so this ritual is sort of ongoing as the characters are figuring out exactly what it's going to do, and that the fact that the rod piece is powering it and how to get it. The Krynn chapter, the Dragonlance chapter rather, is all about figuring out how to get the piece. The characters know where it is as they're leading on the breadcrumbs, but figuring out how their place is and what their place is in this conflict between these good characters, these good aligned characters who are trying to shake off the influence of Lord Soth and the minions of Lord Soth and the very powerful associates of Lord Soth, and the things that is going on. The characters have to decide. Do they just go in and try to take the piece? Do they try to affect the balance of Lord Soth's grip on this region? Do they help the druids? And in some cases, they have to, because they're the people who have got the information. But in other cases, it's completely up to them. And the balance is affected by the way that the characters interact with the world there. And I think that is a through line throughout the whole adventure, is that the characters have a real sense of agency and a real way of affecting what's happening in the campaign setting as they're going after this artifact.
This is an adventure where you feel incredibly powerful as a character.
Yes, for sure.
It's like the stakes are there, but also you feel like you are the key to saving the multiverse of D&D that you're playing this.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the argument that the characters have on their side, is they're trying to convince these factions and these groups who aren't necessarily evil but might be neutral or good-leaning but don't have any sort of knowledge of, they know who Vecna is, but they don't necessarily know why they should care about what's going on.
Yeah, each of these worlds have their own problem.
Yeah, exactly. They're dealing with the things that is the immediate problem for them. In the case of Dragonlance, it's Lord Soth and the rituals of his minions and that sort of thing. In Spelljammer, it's this crashed ship.
Yeah,
right?
So we go to the Astral Sea. We kind of revisit the Spelljammer setting, and I love anytime I can get to the Astral Sea, but there is a moment where you are in a very cool location.
Oh, I know what you're talking about.
Maybe I shouldn't spoil it, but okay, tell me about the Astral Sea portion of this.
The Astral Sea portion largely takes place on what is functionally an asteroid, but what is actually a dying god floating through the Astral Sea. And that dying god is called Havoc. And I say dying rather than dead because the heart of Havoc is still beating, despite the fact that for thousands of years, this god has been sort of on the verge of death. But he's functioning like an asteroid, and a ship crashes into him, and that ship happens to have been powered by a piece of the Rod of Seven Parts, and the crew is marooned on this asteroid/dead god. And the characters have to navigate through the pieces of the ship to be able to get to where the piece of the rod actually is. And while they're doing that, similar to the Eberron chapter, they're having to decide how they might interact with the different things that have been happening to these marooned survivors of the spelljamming ship.
So we go back to Avernus.
Yeah, we absolutely go back to Avernus. We go not only just to Avernus, to the hellscape that's described so distinctively in Descent into Avernus, but we go into a casino, and we go into an infernal casino that is populated mostly by devils and the various staff members who are, evil outsiders for the most part. And this rod piece is an exclusive part of the casino, and the characters have to navigate their way to try to gain access in a very lawful way to make sure that they can get to where this piece is held. And the guardian of this piece is, in another case, is somebody that the characters can interact with and negotiate with to convince and to explain to her why this piece is so important to stopping Vecna's plot, to literally destroy the multiverse as we know it, or to, just straight up try to take it by force. And so it's another example of why it's important for the characters to feel as if they are the saviors of the multiverse, to feel as if what they're doing is a higher purpose than some of these other reasons that these NPCs are using this rod piece. And in this case, Tiamat doesn't want to see the multiverse destroyed. She doesn't want to see the plans that Vecna would have for everybody under his whims, under his will. And so Tiamat's not who you're negotiating with. But, that is a very strong argument, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't matter how evil these NPCs might be. If you say, hey, you won't exist anymore if you don't give me this piece, that's a pretty strong argument.
The enemy of my enemy.
Yeah, exactly.
We go, and of course, Sigil is kind of home base of all of this.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, there's something called the Sigil Sanctum, and it is the centuries-old home of Illustrial Silverhands, one of the most powerful wizards in the multiverse. And it's a safe place that the characters can go where teleportation magic doesn't work, where prying eyes can't see them, even magically. And it's where they're under the protection, but also really they're allied with these very powerful spellcasters who are aiding them behind the scenes while the characters are being the agents to go retrieve the pieces of the rod. These very powerful wizards are in the background researching things. They can provide aid in the form of magical spells or magical items that can be retrieved, and really they are meant to be sort of the cue, to the rest from a James Bond parlance perspective, to the characters who are the ones doing the work.
We do find ourselves on this adventure returning to the campaign setting of Greyhawk.
So you go to the Isle of Serpents, which is a location within Greyhawk. And for those of you who may be familiar with the lich named Acererak, he created a little something called the Tomb of Annihilation. And the lore about Acererak is that he is a lich that specifically creates super deadly tombs to lure adventurers in with a promise of treasure, so that when they die on all of his deadly traps with all of his threats, he takes their souls and holds them and sort of subsumes them and becomes more powerful. And so there are these tombs that are scattered all throughout Greyhawk that Acererak has created, and one of them is called the Tomb of Wayward Souls, and that is where this piece of the Rod of Seven Parts is. And it is very much the traditional Tomb of Acererak in the style of Tomb of Annihilation, with lots and lots of traps and monsters and strange puzzles and things to figure out, meant to test adventurers. And in this case, one of the great pieces of treasure is the Rod of Seven Parts, or the piece of the Rod of Seven Parts.
I love this because you are really getting to not only rub elbows with some very famous, characters in the D&D multiverse, but you are also dealing with some of the biggest bads from the very beginning of D&D.
Yeah.
Acererak being one of them.
Yep.
Vecna.
Yep.
Lord Soth.
Yep.
Strahd.
Yep.
You are having to interact on some level or foil the plans of, or it's
come face to face with these very famous characters from D&D's history. In fact, there are so many iconic characters that are mentioned or specifically show up on camera, as in the characters interact with them, that we created what we call the character dossier that's placed in the back of the book. That is somewhere around 15 pages of beautiful brand new arts, stat blocks for the characters that actually show up, that the characters may end up coming into conflict with, and write-ups about their history for players who may or may not know that much about these characters, or may just want a handy reference to read about where these characters came from.
How do you make each of these locations feel special and upping the ante a little bit? Because we've been to Dragonlance, we've been to Krynn, we've gone to the Eberron setting, we've gone to all these locations. How do you kind of distill that, right? I imagine you want it to feel epic and powerful, but also a little bit fresh and new. Like there are different monsters and entities that are very themed towards that. Like Kryn has a very specific new type of undead that you will encounter, that kind of thing.
I think the way that we made it feel very high stakes is that the Rod of Seven Parts, there are 7 individual discrete pieces, but each of them are in their own right very, very powerful. Each of them in their own right are their own magic item, and each piece does something specific. It allows the casting of a spell. It has the magic that points the way to the next piece. And so these are powerful things that the creatures of the worlds in which they're on have crafted specific things around them. There are evil creatures who are getting their hands on the pieces and want to use it for their own nefarious purposes, because the people who've got them recognize their power, and they don't necessarily have the means to go find the other pieces in the other worlds, but they're using that power for their own means, whether it's good or bad. And the characters have to contend with that in each of these settings, and negotiate in some cases to get a piece back for their big fight against Vecna, or take them back from an evil creature that is using it for terrible things, and essentially just interact with the way that these pieces have been integrated into those individual worlds.